Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on September 13th, Friday the 13th. Not too scary on this show, but a very scary situation last night in Thursday Night Football as Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa suffered a concussion. This is the third in the past 2 years, so we're going to be talking about what the ramifications are for his career. Obviously, prayers to him. Questions coming off the board here from Andre. I think that we're going to address it a little bit more in depth, but I think that Tua's career is definitely up in the air right now. I would probably lean towards him retiring, but again, we'll break down that entire situation and just give some brief thoughts as well on the game itself, what kind of takeaways the Bills can come out of this with, where obviously, yes, a very scary situation with Tua, but if you're just looking at the football analysis part of this, I think there were a lot of positives for the Bills. So again, we'll talk about the whole Tua situation and the game as a whole. And then we're going to move on towards later on in the show, giving my list of the 0-1 NFL teams that are under the most pressure for this upcoming week to bounce back with a win. We'll be discussing that as well as my top 5 picks against the spread for this upcoming weekend from a betting perspective. And then finally, we are going to end off the show by switching gears a little bit to the NBA, where we are going to be addressing the rumors that the Golden State Warriors are interested in Heat star Jimmy Butler. So a whole lot to dive into today, but before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section and the live chat to let us know what your thoughts are on the latest happenings in sports, whether you have a quick comment or a thoughtful question. We want to hear what you have to say. We here at the GSMC Sports Network really appreciate getting the feedback and input from our audience members. And if you would even like to take it to the next level, you can use the super chat button that is now available on YouTube by clicking the $sign. You can leave a comment that will pop up on screen for everyone to see. If you leave a tip and or donation attached to it, you can also use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net to do the same. Anything would be very greatly appreciated on both fronts there. Last night, the Buffalo Bills and Miami Dolphins faced off on Thursday Night Football. A divisional matchup. Seemed like it was going to be a high-scoring affair in this really entertaining football game, and unfortunately, instead, we come away with sort of a grim leading topic, and that was that Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa suffered a concussion late in the game, scrambling up through the line of scrimmage and, past the first down, just sort of had almost not even that massive of a collision with Bills defensive back Damar Hamlin, and immediately you could see the way that he just sort of dropped to the ground, that he was not okay. And it's a really bad sign for Tua's career because at this point, again, it didn't seem like that hard of a hit. Now, there was definitely some whiplash at that neck area that it's not an easy blow for anybody to overcome, but again, with the history of it, just how fast Tua dropped, things are looking really grim for him moving forward here. It sounds like the protocol, according to CBS Sports' injury experts, that this would be a minimum of 8 weeks, given the fact that this is his third diagnosed concussion of his NFL career in just 2 years. That, concussions are typically an injury that the amount of time required to bounce back can be a little bit fluid, but Sounds like minimum 8 weeks here. Again, that's according to CBS Sports, but we'll see, because I have a hard time imagining that he's even going to return to the field this season. Now, that's all speculation, and I don't want to do that. This is obviously a very sensitive topic in regards to this is an injury that can affect Tua for the rest of his life. So, I don't want to make cases for or against him retiring. He has said that he's contemplated retiring after 2022 when he suffered concussions in back-to-back weeks. It was 2 in the span of 5 days or so. That I do personally think that retirement is the best option for him. But that being said, it is also a situation where it doesn't matter what I think, it doesn't matter what you think, or even what the organization thinks to that point. It's really just him and his family that have to come to this decision, and I don't want to speculate on that any further. So, that being said, there is sort of, again, it feels gross to talk about sort of the financial implications coming out of this as well, because we all acknowledge, prayers for Tua that he is able to recover from this. But it's a subplot of this whole story is the fact that Tua did just get paid a massive 4-year, $212.4 million deal this past offseason. And it does tie into the conversation as well in regards to, is it worth it for Tua to keep putting his body on the line like this, knowing the dangers that come with it, especially when you're talking about the head like that. So the deal was, when it came out, $167 million guaranteed, but he doesn't get to collect that entire number until he actually plays through the year, and he won't be able to collect the full $167 million if he does decide to walk away from the game of football on his own will. Spotrac broke down how the guarantees work with this deal, so I double checked here. I believe that this is the right information, that Tua has received $43 million in guaranteed money for this 2024 season. So it sounds like he already has that banked as a little bit of a cushion, depending on how he wants to go about this. Now, if he is medically forced into retirement, which is definitely on the table if they determine that his head is not right to go and continue playing football, the entire sum of that $167 million of guaranteed money will be his to claim. If he decides at his own discretion that he wants to step away and retire on the spot, then he will not get that additional $124 million outside of the $43 million that he has banked from this season. And ultimately, him and the Dolphins could negotiate from there and maybe ends up with a larger portion there, but probably not the entire thing. Again, I don't want to sort of argue for or against him retiring. That's none of my business necessarily. But again, just to sort of reiterate what the financial situation is here, he has already gotten a pretty solid chunk out of that contract that he signed in this past offseason, that it's not like he would be stepping away from it entirely, but a lot of money left on the board there as well. So again, we're just gonna leave it there. And that's really the entirety of the off the field discussion with Tua. But that being said, and again, praying for him, the Dolphins have to keep moving here. As much as they'll probably take the next couple days to sort of mourn is the wrong word, because it's not like he's going anywhere necessarily, but just sort of reflect on this injury and be upset about it for a bit. But they're going to have to keep moving. And where do they move on from here? It doesn't sound like they are planning on taking any immediate action. Per Ian Rappaport, quote, Mike McDaniel says the team is moving forward with Skylar Thompson, but will sign a quarterback for depth. Now, you think about what types of free agent quarterbacks are available right now, there aren't very many at all. Now, Again, it sounds like the plan is that Skylar Thompson is the starting quarterback anyways. Definitely wouldn't make me feel great if I were a Miami fan. I think that if there were any free agent quarterback that you could maybe talk yourself into, Ryan Tannehill does feel like the logical option there. Just last weekend, Rappaport also put out a story about how Tannehill is, quote, waiting for the right opportunity to sign with a team. And it feels to me that this would kind of be that ideal landing spot for Tannehill if he does want to work his way back into the NFL with a chance to start once again. And there might not be a better situation in general for a quarterback than what is going on in Miami with two amazing wide receiver talents, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The run game that is developing, two speedsters in Devin Achane and Raheem Mostert once Mostert returns, and then an innovative play caller in Mike McDaniel. I know that some people are sort of getting on McDaniel's case. Last night wasn't an excellent showing from him from a coaching game plan style necessarily, but that being said, I still am a believer in McDaniel as a coach. And again, in terms of free agent quarterbacks, there really aren't any other serviceable options outside of Tannehill. Tannehill obviously started his career with the Miami Dolphins all those years ago, as was able to find a rejuvenation of his career in Tennessee, where he had some good years, some years that he was legit seriously in MVP consideration, specifically the season that the Dolphins were the 1 seed. But that being said, at this point, Tannehill, you're definitely not getting a super reliable starter at that point. He ended up losing his job to, it was Malik Willis first, I think, and then it was Will Levis. So that's an area that I'm definitely not ultra confident in Tannehill being the answer. I understand at this point it's definitely the easiest answer for them, and the one that you don't need to, I suppose, overreact in week 1 here, considering the fact that yes, you lose your starting quarterback, that it's not like you want to go out and spend really big on another quarterback right now, but it's something that they are going to have to consider. So it sounds like the plan is right now that Skylar Thompson is going to start games for them. We'll see what that depth signing is, whether it's Tannehill or somebody else, and we will see how that sort of shakes out for them. I feel like they probably give it a few weeks, and we'll see what their record is at that point as well. Obviously now 1-1, and this is a team that feels like they are talented enough to make the playoffs, probably even outside of the quarterback position. This is a very talented roster for Miami. I just don't know if they have that option at quarterback right now to be able to make that push. So that being said, what are the other types of moves that the Dolphins could make to bolster their roster? And I think there are actually a handful of interesting trade candidates should things not go well in Miami and if things break differently for other teams across the league as well. The number one name I will throw out, and I've kind of sneakily talked myself into this, is what are the possibilities here that if the Dolphins continue to struggle, or even if the Dolphins are in the mix still and the Giants continue to struggle, that Daniel Jones could be traded to Miami. It's a situation where I even sort of ran it by the idea by some Giants friends of mine, and they were more than willing to pack the bags for Daniel Jones to head out of New York. It's a situation where you wouldn't be taking on the full 3 years that are technically left on his deal. There is an out after this season that they could probably get the Giants anyways to shoulder the majority of the financial obligation to Daniel Jones. He gets a little bit of a fresh start, probably a 1-year gig, but he gets another chance to play with some actual weapons for once in his career and see whether or not, it has been fully on him or whether or not it's also somewhat a product of him being on a pretty untalented Giants offense these past couple seasons as well. That's one that I legitimately think would be very interesting and is conceivable. There are some other names as well that definitely could be in the mix. I think that whoever ends up ultimately losing out on the Miami Dolphins or on the Pittsburgh Steelers job, whether that be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, I think that either one of them could maybe be moved. Now, I'm not sure how set the Steelers are on either one of them, but that's a case where if you could maybe get, some solid draft compensation from Miami, that it might be worth giving up a little bit of that depth anyways, but that one doesn't feel quite as realistic for me. I feel like if the Patriots start to dissolve here a little bit and they don't look good in these next few weeks, it's weird because the interdivision aspect of it, I'm not sure if the Patriots would be jumping at the opportunity to trade Brissett to a rival like that. But if it looks like Brissett isn't the man for the job in New England and the Patriots are ready, the key sort of aspect of this is if they are ready to move on to Drake May, that it might not hurt them sort of just offloading Jacoby Brissett for a day 2, maybe early day 3 pick, just something to consider. And then last couple names I have here as well is some backup options that are around the league that have a lot of starting experience, and Jimmy Garoppolo and Jameis Winston, where I think that Winston, especially, Cleveland is probably going to look a little bit to hold on to him because I don't know how secure Deshaun Watson is in his job right now. But Winston in Miami would automatically make them a very fun team moving forward for the rest of this season. You want to talk about just somebody with arm talent that can let it rip for Tyreek Hill. I mean, Jameis would be so reckless, but also so fun in that Miami offense that I could definitely see myself getting a little bit excited about Miami because ultimately, and again, I don't want to take away from Tua right now. It would be distasteful considering the sequence of events here, but I have always said that I think that Mike McDaniel's offense is quarterback friendly, and I think there are a lot of quarterbacks that could thrive in that system. And now we're going to get a chance to see whether or not that is the case with all of the weapons they have. It's just a matter of who are they actually going to put at the helm. Again, as for now, it's Skylar Thompson, but truthfully, I would be very surprised if we see him being the Dolphins starting quarterback for the remainder of the season, knowing that this is a front office that believes in the roster that they have right now and that they should be in the realm of being true playoff threats. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Again, prayers for Tua to be able to recover from this and not be impacted too severely in the long term. But I mean, man, just what a scary situation is, of course, a reminder of just how dangerous football is. But again, let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think that Tua should retire? As much as, give us your thoughts at the end of the day as well, though. This is a decision he's going to have to make for himself. But we did have a football game last night, obviously overshadowed by this very drastic news here. But we're going to be talking about just some general takeaways from the game itself because the Buffalo Bills, even before the injury occurred, the Bills looked really good, which was a big surprise to me. So we are going to be diving into what we did learn from, again, a pure football perspective on the field. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. around and feel like everybody is the fake, cause I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant, I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some loose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now just going to be giving some takeaways from last night's game between the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills. Now, obviously, again, addressed it at the top of the show, the Tua injury is tragic and, all thoughts are out to him. But that being said, it did sort of overshadow what was a pretty impressive performance, all things considered, from the Buffalo Bills. And I just want to dive into that a little bit. And, again, injuries were sort of the story of the night with Tua, but the Bills as well, who are already dealing with so much turnover on that defensive side of the ball, especially, but on the roster as a whole. Things continued to get a little bit worse for them on that side of the ball, as starting linebacker Terrell Bernard left the game with a pec injury late in the first quarter on that touchdown drive from the Dolphins. He tried to stay in, but ultimately was pulled back out, was reevaluated, and ultimately was ruled out. And there is no timetable as to the severity of it and whether or not he is going to be back in short time. So, we'll have to see there. But that is definitely a very tough loss for a Bills defense that is already without their number one linebacker, of course, in Matt Milano. He is also dealing with a pec injury. He tore his pec during training camp and is expected to be out until around December. So to add this injury on top of it is just brutal. Is a brutal blow for them in general, that, you're going to hope that Bernard isn't out all too long. But at least on the bright side, you did see some promise from specifically Dorian Williams, who was a third round pick for them in 2023 out of Tulane. He had 10 tackles in this game, looked pretty explosive, came up with a big tackle on 3rd and short to force Miami into ultimately turning the ball over on downs. So great sign there from a young player that they would love to have emerge for them. Balin Spector, a little bit of a shaky start on that first drive, but definitely looked more comfortable as the game went on there. So that's a huge plus for them. In that front seven, you also saw, we had mentioned headed into the show yesterday that Ed Oliver was very quiet for them in week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals, but Oliver you can only hold him down so long, and he was able to return to form last night. I thought that he was excellent on that front line. Nothing easy for the Dolphins in the ground game when he was involved there. So a lot of promises from the front seven of the Buffalo front. But additionally, on top of that as well, I thought that we saw a surprisingly very good performance from that Buffalo secondary that, of course, is down the likes of Jordan Poyer, who they actually played last night, but him, Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, and ultimately they played pretty well, all things considered. This is a Miami defense that obviously can test you through the air. That was, sort of their calling card last year. And we know with the threats of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle that you're never going to have an easy time necessarily facing off against against this type of an offense, but ultimately they kept everything in front of them and they were able to sort of limit any sort of downhill passing attack for Miami. Tua, when he was playing, he was held to just 1.82 air yards per completion. According to ESPN, that is the worst mark of his NFL career so far. All but 2 of his completions were within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. When you saw him trying to push the ball downfield, the Bills were sort of everywhere. And there was definitely a factor there as well that Tua wasn't on the same page with his receivers. 2 interceptions, one throwing them to Grant Dubose and one throwing to Robbie Chosen, or Robbie Anderson, probably more well known by. But, you know, I thought that was a pretty good job from the Bills defense to, again, just keep everything in front of them and sort of force the Dolphins to try and nickel and dime their way up the field. And ultimately, I mean, I thought that they moved the ball fine, all things considered, but definitely not a typical Miami Dolphins performance. Definitely not what I was anticipating heading into this game. And now you look specifically, I want to give some credit as well to Christian Benford, who really had the first quarter of his life in this game, where he shut down Tyreek Hill on that deep go route early on that first drive to force an incompletion there. And then he was actually in coverage versus Dubose when that ball ended up pretty well covered. That ball ended up getting picked off. It fell off of, or bounced off of, the shoulder pad of Dubose and ultimately landed in the hands of a teammate of his. And then Benford himself ended up securing an interception on that play to Robbie Chosen. A little bit of an incompletion, or a little bit of a miscommunication there. Not to mention that Tua overthrew him a little bit, but I thought that Benford was excellent in this game. And you're just looking for players to really step up in this Buffalo secondary, considering how many players they lost. And, you know, they brought in Rasul Douglas last night. I thought that he was very good, all things considered, but you're relying on a lot of young and unproven talent in that Buffalo secondary, where Damar Hamlin is now starting for them this year for the first time in his career. Kaiir Elam, their first round pick from a couple years ago, he's getting on the field more. Taron Johnson was even out for them last night, so they were even that much thinner in the secondary. And again, all things considered, I know obviously the Tua injury plays a factor here, and it is hard to overlook that, but even when he was in the game, I'm purely saying this from the perspective of, I think that the Bills defense deserves credit for what they were able to do last night. And this is the type of performance that Bills fans can really sort of rally behind. Obviously, again, the messiness of everything else does sort of take away inherently a little bit from what Buffalo was able to do, but I thought that this was an excellent defensive performance across the board for the Bills, and that's sort of what we were looking for, because they got punched in the mouth a little bit, especially in the first half against the Cardinals last week. And to be able to sort of step up to the level of competition, force bad decisions, and again, just this idea of staying disciplined to your game plan. It was clear that they weren't going to let Tua and the Dolphins beat them over the top, and ultimately, you know, they got the results they were hoping for. So very encouraging there. On the offensive side of the ball, I mean, it got to a certain point in the third quarter. Their offense didn't even really have to do all that much, but I mean, how about the push up front that they got from their offensive line in this game that opened up James Cook to be able to go 11 carries, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, it was great running, of course, by Cook, and you saw the breakaway speed, but the second touchdown that he scored on the ground, at least, being he did finish this game with 3 touchdowns because he capped off that first drive for them. But Cook in this game breaking for what was a 49-yard touchdown on the first play of the drive. You got the offensive line mauling Miami on the front line. The Dolphins defense probably is a little bit of a concern there. I feel like we haven't seen Jalen Ramsey, be consistent yet up to this point. Thought it was an interesting move for them when they decided to hand him out a contract extension headed into the season. He hasn't necessarily been at his finest, and I just haven't been super encouraged, all things considered, from this Miami defense. Now, we'll see. This is obviously a very tough offense to face off against as well in the Bills, but to lose not even, and again, obviously the Tua injury, but to have their defense be so susceptible, and that was without Josh Allen ever really having to go into that mode. The scramble that he had on 3rd and long where he rolled out and he was able to hit Ty Johnson down the field that set them up on the goal line. Now that was obviously very impressive, but this was a little bit of an inhibited Josh Allen. He did come into this game with the glove on his left hand that he ended up injuring on one of his touchdown runs against Arizona in week 1, and really it was not noticeable whatsoever, and that's in large part, I think, due to the fact that the run game was just going so well for the Bills that they never even really had to press the emergency Josh Allen button. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Obviously, for the Dolphins, their concerns go a lot larger scale than whether or not their defense didn't look good in one particular game. The Dolphins aren't a team. I thought that they were going to see a little bit of regression this year anyways, and it's going to be really tough to, of course, overcome the Tua injury. We still don't have any updates on what the timeline is there yet. We probably won't for weeks now. I would imagine that they're going to slow play this as much as possible. So, I mean, a great win for the Bills. Obviously, the Dolphins, not too many takeaways in terms of their roster performance as well. I was just more so really impressed with what Buffalo was able to come out and perform with. And, a lot of people were writing them off after all of the losses that they suffered in the offseason. And now here they are, 2-0. Couldn't really ask for a better start. Obviously, their defense got ran up and down a little bit in the beginning of that Arizona game, but they locked down in the second half. They carried that momentum into this game against Miami, and I think that they are definitely, trending in the right direction. And again, the injuries, we'll see how long Terrell Bernard is out, but ultimately speaking here, I mean, this is probably the worst that we're going to see them in theory, specifically on that defensive side of the ball. The chemistry is only going to continue to develop over time. The broadcast mentioned last night that there was only one wide receiver on the Bills that had ever even caught a pass from Josh Allen prior to this season, and that was Khalil Shakir. So I think we are going to continue to see improved development within the Bills internally, and we'll see what types of repercussions that has on the rest of the league, because Josh Allen and this Bills team just refuses to quit. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. We're now going to be looking ahead to the remainder of the week 2 action, and I'm going to be talking about which 0-1 teams in the NFL are under the most pressure to bounce back in week 2. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, we're going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we're now moving on from the Thursday night football game and going to be looking ahead here to this upcoming weekend. And specifically right now, I want to focus on which of the 0-1 teams in the NFL entering into week 2 are due for and need to find a bounce back performance this week, because as we know, the statistics, they're extensive. They kind of get thrown in our face sometimes, but falling into the season 0-2 and being able to try and dig your way out of that hole to make the playoffs is deceptively very difficult. Only 2 teams since 2019 have been able to do so. That is the Cincinnati Bengals in 2022 and the Houston Texans last year. So we have 16 teams that lost last week. So again, just sort of deciding which teams would be more so in panic mode if they do end up losing this upcoming week. And I do think there is a pretty clear number one, and that is the New York Jets. Last week, they played the San Francisco 49ers on the road. That is a very difficult situation to play in. Aaron Rodgers playing his first game his first full game with the New York Jets, coming off of that Achilles injury that I didn't think that was too much of an overreaction spot. But coming into this week, 2 consecutive road games isn't ideal. But this week you have the Tennessee Titans, who last week lost to a team that didn't score a single offensive touchdown. And this is an area where if you are seriously considering the Jets to be Super Bowl contenders, you got to win a game like this. Against Tennessee, again, I think due to the level of competition, that's kind of the biggest thing. I'm not ready to write off any team if they end up falling into 0-2 necessarily, but the Jets are in a weird situation where obviously the pressure is on them. This is a make or break season for them, so it's not like you're sort of planning out, okay, well, the vision is there. No, the vision is winning this season, and you really can't afford to be fumbling around there all too long. So I think the Jets need a win this week, and if they don't, I start to have some real concerns with what they look like for the remainder of the season. Second team I have here is the Indianapolis Colts. Now, hear me out here, because the Colts obviously are a younger team, second year with Shane Steichen as their head coach. This is hopefully Anthony Richardson's first full season with the team that we all acknowledge that there is a lot of upside with this group and that they should continue to grow from here on out. But that being said, if we're talking about just this season, and a lot of people picked them to make the playoffs this upcoming year, and this is where I think we could start to see that sort of fall by the wayside. They are going to Lambeau, obviously never an easy place to play a football game as an opposing team, but they are most likely going to get Malik Willis playing against them, somebody that they have a little bit of experience with, considering Willis was with the Titans for a couple years. So they got, their share of scouting against them, but Malik Willis is not a typical starting quarterback in the NFL, just based off of, where he's at this point. This should be a game where the Colts are able to capitalize. They are 2.5 point favorites in this game as things currently stand. And again, if they end up losing this game and not making the playoffs this year, I'm not worried about their long-term future. I do think that last year they were almost a little bit ahead of schedule, even with Anthony Richardson missing as much time as he did. But if we're talking about teams under pressure that are hoping to make the playoffs this year, this is kind of a must-win for the Colts to some degree. As must-win as you can get in week 2, at least. The Cleveland Browns are definitely also on this list. They have another game that's not an easy one. They are at Jacksonville coming up this week. I am a believer in the Jaguars. I think their defense is going to be a lot better than people are anticipating. And The reason the Browns are under so much pressure is because after last week, I mean, all in the media this past week, it has been sort of slandering Deshaun Watson, which is fair because he was really bad against Dallas in week 1. I thought that he was maybe slightly better in the second half, but at that point, the game was already over. And, he also didn't do himself any favors, later in that game as well, where they were kind of maybe still in the game if they were able to score there at the end of the third quarter. But it was just a really bad showing overall for the Browns. Now, again, you can make excuses as well that they are missing both of their offensive tackles. Now, they were both limited participants in practice as of Thursday, so they at least have that going for them. We'll see whether or not Jedrick Wills or Jack Conklin are able to return for this upcoming game, which could be a difference maker for them. But I think that we're looking at sort of counting down the days until whether or not Deshaun Watson is even going to continue to be the starting quarterback for the Browns. I think he's going to have maybe a little bit of a longer leash, just considering the financial obligations that they have to him. But Bill Simmons of The Ringer put out a podcast, and he said that he thinks this is going to be Deshaun Watson's last start with the Browns. So, the clock is ticking. The media is definitely on the backs of the Browns. And, Jameis Winston probably also isn't the worst backup quarterback option. So maybe they do sort of pull the trigger on moving off from him a little bit earlier than you may think. But I definitely think that they have pressure surrounding them. Again, we're talking sort of more so media narratives and the investments into quarterbacks specifically with the Browns and this next team as well. The Atlanta Falcons, who last week looked really dysfunctional, specifically on the offensive side of the ball against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers also did not score a touchdown in general in this game, and ultimately were still able to beat the Falcons. Kirk Cousins looked really bad in this game with the decision making on both of his interceptions, the entire lack of mobility. Now, in his defense, he was under an immense amount of pressure. The Steelers are still an elite defense, so there is that. This upcoming week, I mean, it's not going to be easy for them. They do have the Philadelphia Eagles in Philly on Monday Night Football, so they're under pressure. I think the bigger thing for them is Kirk Cousins more specifically is under pressure to look better than he did this past week, given the immense amount of investment that the Falcons poured into him with that contract in free agency. And the fans of Atlanta, I don't think, are going to have all that much of an emotional attachment to Kirk Cousins if he goes out and he does not play well for them on a regular basis. That I could see a lot of clamoring for Michael Penix Jr. to sort of kick in. So the Falcons are under pressure. Again, I don't even think, a win would be excellent for them. That's not really where my standard is for them right now. It's more so the offense looking better. And again, talking sort of media pressure here more so than my actual concern level on their ability to make the playoffs. But the other team that has sort of been slandered all week long, I think unjustly so, is the Cincinnati Bengals and specifically Joe Burrow. You have Chris Canty of ESPN talking about how he's selling all of his Joe Burrow stock, that he's been average these past couple years. I'm not going to lie, statistically, Joe Burrow has not been excellent by any stretch of the imagination, but I am still a believer in him. I think there's been, a number of varying factors as well that have come into play with the Bengals. Him missing all of training camp with the calf injury last year. That, again, if you want to say that injuries are just an excuse, I hear you. You play the games that you play in. You have to finish them out. But I do think that he was a little bit inhibited in 2023 to start the year. That San Francisco game and what I believe was week 5 was sort of when we started to see Burrow coming around a little bit more and starting to play his game. I thought the Bengals were headed in the right direction. And then all of a sudden, the wrist injury occurs against the Ravens on primetime football that ended his career and, in essence, ended his season, I should say, not his career, but ended that and also basically ended the season for the Bengals as a whole, as Jake Browning was never really the option for them. But, I do think that Joe Burrow has it in him to be able to respond here. I'm not selling my stock in him. If anything, buy the dip would probably be my advice to that. Last week, definitely not blaming the injuries on him. He said that the wrist wasn't bothering him despite the clip that was going viral about him drinking the water. I mean, from what I saw in the game itself, I don't think that it looked like he was inhibited. Now, him saying, I have a hard time believing there's no pain with him in that wrist. But either way, again, excuses are not really on the table for him, that he is going to need to sort of respond to this. Now, this upcoming week, they do play the Chiefs in a game that we're about to get into my picks for the weekend. I did not go with this game, but just saying, if you're talking about sort of overreactions from week one and that swaying a line, I mean, the Chiefs coming off of a win against the Ravens, very convincing. I do think that the Chiefs are going to be better than they were last year, which is a very scary thought. But they're 6-point favorites over the Bengals, who everybody is entirely selling their stock on. I think that this could be at least keep it competitive bounce back spot. The spread is 6. Again, I'm not including the Bengals in my picks, but the Bengals to keep things close is definitely something that I think is very plausible. But let me know who you think is under the most pressure as well. I know this obviously isn't a consensus thing. I ran this list by my boss earlier this morning. He talked about it, the Giants being under a lot of pressure this upcoming week, and I forget what the second team that he said. He said the Bears as well, but Bears also won last week. The Giants, I just don't necessarily think that they're a playoff team anyways, and I never did. So yeah, there's some level of pressure there as well because of the dysfunction that is definitely coming to fruition. So Giants could definitely be on the table here, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be diving into my best bets for the upcoming weekend. We did pretty well last week, all things considered, but we'll see whether or not that was just beginner's luck or if this is the start of something for the year to come. But before we get into that, we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to do week 2 here of my best bets for the NFL weekend. Last week we did pretty well for ourselves, going 4-1. Ultimately, it was the Browns that ended up hurting me. Just a huge misread on my part. Didn't do a good enough job of looking into the injury status of the offensive tackles as well. But even if they were healthy, I mean, that was just a disastrous game, really, for the Browns from start to finish there. So hoping to even top what our performance last week with an undefeated stretch this upcoming week. So my first bet of the day, the Seattle Seahawks going to New England. Now, this is a game that I'm hoping is not an overreaction from last week, that the Seahawks offense looked very dysfunctional to me. Maybe the worst performance from any offensive line that we saw last week versus Denver. I didn't think that Geno Smith looked particularly sharp either. He's not somebody that I'm all that confident in anyways. And this is a Patriots defense that I am very confident in. That they are a very talented group. They didn't seem to have any sort of drop-off in week one with, post-Belichick, and that was against a very talented offense in the Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, down some pieces for sure, but that being said, I don't think that the Seahawks offense is so I think that the Patriots defense can limit the Seahawks offense. Let's put it that way. And on the other side, Mike McDonald is an excellent defensive mind that I have a very hard time imagining the Patriots are going to be able to put up many points against them. It was hard enough against Cincinnati last week that Seattle should probably be a better core on the defensive side of the ball for this season, that I just don't think there are going to be a lot of points scored, and the spread being over 3 points, you're telling me that they keep it within the range of a field goal, that they're going to be able to cover this spread. I think it's good enough at home. This is the season opener for New England. I think that the energy around the Patriots has really shifted over the course of the past week from where the expectations were at during preseason to this upcoming week. So that being said, again, I think it's very possible that this could be a little bit of an overreaction line that, if things played out differently, I feel like this line would have been even larger. I still like the Patriots this week to possibly even win. Probably not. I like the 3.5 points, though. Get me within a field goal and we're gold. So going with the Patriots as the first play of the weekend. The Arizona Cardinals, they were our lock of the week last week. 6.5 point dogs to the Buffalo Bills. Took a backdoor cover, but they were able to get it done. And I'm still a believer in them for this upcoming season. Now, Kyler Murray and his quotes that came out over the past couple days about him not really taking full accountability for the lack of getting Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball. But also, I can a little bit sympathize with where he's at there. I just think it's a bad look regardless. And, the way with words didn't come across great. But, that being said, I do still think that this is a pretty talented team. Their defense faced Josh Allen, and ultimately he was able to run all over them, especially in the red zone. That was the biggest issue. The reality is the Rams are not going to have that much time to be able to sit back and throw. We did just get a report from Ian Rappaport that Steve Avila, their starting offensive guard, he is going to be out until what sounds like around November, where he got hurt this past week. Alaric Jackson, their starting left tackle, he is still dealing with suspension. Joe Noteboom was also placed on injured reserve list. That was he was the replacement for Jackson in the first place, so they got a third string left tackle starting right now. Puka Nacua is going to be out. I'm a believer in the Cardinals for this upcoming season. If they are going to be able to have any form of success, I think that this is sort of the spot for them to prove themselves against what is a beat-up Rams team on the other end. There is not that same scramble ability, of course, from Matthew Stafford. I think that the personnel in that front seven is good enough to be able to put pressure on the Rams, and ultimately 1 point spread at home. Again, this is a little bit more of a desperation pick, I think, for the Cardinals, that they sort of have to win this game if they are going to be competitive this season. So I'm going with the Cards once again in week 2. Next pick here, the Pittsburgh Steelers going on the road once again to Denver. Don't love picking a team that is back-to-back road games to start the year, but that being said, they are going to Denver to face what is a not very good offense. Now, again, last week they played the Seahawks. Seahawks, I do believe in as a defense, so there is that. But it's really hard for me to imagine that Bo Nix is going to be able to have all that much success, if any, against what is a very talented Pittsburgh defense. They're probably even better, I would argue at least, than what the Seahawks are from a player talent standpoint. But the real hang up here is, well, the Broncos defense also actually did look pretty good. And the Steelers were unable to get into the end zone in week 1. This could absolutely be a low scoring game. The over-under line right now is 36.5, which is the lowest of week 2. So that does have me a little bit nervous. Spread is at 2.5, so we need a field goal. That's it. And I think that is possible. Justin Fields, just don't make the fatal mistakes. Don't do too much. I thought that the way that he played was pretty... It was good. It was good. That's all you really need to say about it. And that is enough for me to be able to think that the Steelers are just a far more talented team than the Broncos. I also think that the Broncos' defensive success last week might have also been signs of what is a not great offense there. So again, I am locking in the Steelers at -2.5 on the road. Next up, New York Jets visiting the Tennessee Titans. We just talked about in the last segment. I think that the Jets are the team that has the single most pressure to succeed this upcoming week, given the fact that they are 0-1. I don't overreact to the 49ers loss, but this is one where you're playing a Titans team that didn't even allow an offensive touchdown last week and played a rookie Caleb Williams. I'm still very hesitant about, putting the Jets into Super Bowl contention conversations, really. But if you're a believer in them for that, they should easily be able to handle the Titans. And I'm not saying easily as in demolish them, but this is a game that they should absolutely win. And Will Levis looked like maybe the worst quarterback that started last week. The disastrous, of course, decision to try and flip it out that led to the Tyreek Stevenson pick 6 to end the game. So I think that this is, a bounce back spot, especially so for that Jets defense, that it's one thing allowing the 49ers to sort of, move the ball up and down on you against Kyle Shanahan. That's very defensible. Having Jordan Mason being the one that's doing the heavy lifting in the run game, I think that defense really got humbled last week. And this time around, again, this is a Robert Saleh specialty, is supposed to be the defensive side of the ball. He knows that he's coaching for his job this upcoming season. It's one thing, Aaron Rodgers is going to do what Aaron Rodgers is going to do, but Saleh, there is no excuse for not shutting down this Tennessee offense on the other side of the ball. Don't love the line being at 3.5. It does feel a little bit like a stay away game, but I think ultimately the Jets are going to be able to squeak out the cover. The Titans were 3.5 point underdogs last week against the Chicago Bears, and the Bears played an awful game and were still able to cover that. So I'm riding with the Jets -3.5. And then final game of the weekend, the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Cleveland Browns. This game is actually in Jacksonville, where they are 3-point favorites. So this is about even odds. And, this is another one where I feel like I don't want to buy into the overreaction necessarily of, okay, well, the Browns were just so bad that I'm going to pick against them no matter what. I headed into this season, I've been a believer in the Jaguars, that their defense can be deceptively better than a lot of people are anticipating. I thought that the second half offense for the Jaguars was not good, but that being said, if ETN holds on to the ball at the goal line and scores the touchdown, it's a different game, and I think they maybe beat the Dolphins. Not going to talk hypotheticals there because that's counterproductive, but that for the Jaguars to lose by a hair last week while also suffering the most unfortunate turn of events that are within the rules of football, which is fumbling through the end zone, I think that they're going to be able to have a bounce back game against the Browns. It seems like the confidence in Deshaun Watson within the building doesn't appear to be there. And I have the Jaguars covering here at -3. I could definitely see this resulting in a push. Taking the 5th pick here. So was a little bit dicier here, but I do think that the Jaguars get it done at home and sort of set themselves up on the right track moving forward here. So just as an overview once again of the week 2 picks, I have the New England Patriots at home against the Seahawks covering +3.5. I have the Cardinals -1 against the Rams at home. I have the Steelers going on the road -2.5 against the Denver Broncos. I have the Jets -3.5 against the Titans, and I have the Jaguars -3. But let me know what your thoughts and critiques are in the comment section. Additionally, let me know what other lines sort of stand out to you headed into this upcoming weekend of action. But we are going to be taking our final break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, we're actually going to be shifting gears a little bit to the NBA, where some very interesting rumors have popped out about the Golden State Warriors potentially being interested in Heat star Jimmy Butler. So we will be talking about that, but first, or maybe not, because welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we're going to be breaking down the recent rumors that the Golden State Warriors are reportedly interested in acquiring Heat star Jimmy Butler. Now, the Warriors have sort of been in a handful of different rumors throughout the course of this offseason. They are very clearly in a point where they need to make a move, especially coming off of this past year's Olympics, where Steph Curry in those last 2 games showed that he is able to step up in the biggest moments, in the biggest games, if he is actually there. Unfortunately for the Warriors, they were unable to make the playoffs last year. Ended up losing in the play-in tournament and had to sit out the entire dance. So the rumors of this potential deal of the Warriors inquiring about Jimmy Butler occurred when Sam Amick of The Athletic went on the TK show and said that the Warriors have interest in Butler and, quote, probably made a couple calls to the Heat in the offseason. And that doesn't sound exactly like scorching hot, definitive the Warriors are pursuing Jimmy Butler, but it's the NBA offseason. It's all rumor-based, and either way, the Heat are at a point where they're not going to trade Jimmy Butler this offseason. That was never really on the table. But that being said, the Heat are coming off of a second straight season of being a play-in tournament team. I know they went to the finals in 2023, so you can throw that back at me. I hear you. I understand what they did in the playoffs. But the Heat also aren't trying to, make the path more difficult for themselves on a regular basis. It's not a real form of sustainable success right there. And it's not just that. I mean, they looked like a middling team during the regular season of each of the past 2 seasons. Yeah, Jimmy Butler got red hot in the playoffs. They also sort of benefited from some injuries to the Bucks in that first series, especially with Giannis. But again, hypotheticals there. We don't really do that on this show. So the Heat made the finals in 2023. That's excellent. But for the majority of the past 2 years, the Heat have looked like a very mediocre team. And obviously, playoff Jimmy and this idea that they can just flip the switch in the playoffs and everything is magically fixed. I mean, it is definitely true that they are of that caliber. And, specifically Jimmy Butler has the experience where he can sort of take his game to another level when the playoffs arise. But we also saw him last year end up getting hurt because they weren't good enough in the regular season and they had to play a play-in tournament game. In that extra game, he ends up getting hurt. Now, Pat Riley himself has sort of addressed this to some degrees that Jimmy Butler needs to play more games for the Heat. And the Heat have, across the board, been dealing with injuries these past couple seasons. If you look back to this past season, or even in 2023 as well, I mean, Tyler Hero has missed a very significant amount of time last year. Jimmy Butler's missed at least 15 games in each of the last 5 seasons. So that obviously hasn't been exactly a reliable form for them. They end up trading for Terry Rozier at the trade deadline last year, which was a move that I definitely liked. But as soon as he started finding his rhythm, he ends up missing the rest of the season with a neck injury and never returns for the playoffs there either. So, you can make excuses for the Heat in terms of an injury standpoint, and I hear that. But that being said, at the end of the day, results are the results. The Heat would like to be better in the regular season, and I would hope every Heat fan would agree with that they're not trying to go out and sort of 1-seed hunt in the first round of every year. But like I mentioned, Warriors missed the playoffs last year. Curry showed that he's one of the best players in the NBA, but they've just sort of been treading water a little bit these past couple years. Now, they made the second round of the playoffs in 2023 themselves before falling to the Lakers, So it's not like they've been entirely incompetent by any means, but it does feel like they're stuck in this middle ground a little bit where it's Steph Curry and it's drop off everybody else on the roster, which includes Klay Thompson, who they saw depart in this past offseason. Draymond Green, when he's been on the court, has been impactful for them, but also he gets himself suspended for a lengthy time last year because of the whole Gobert situation. So, Draymond's your second most reliable player in this situation, and he doesn't even give you a ton from an offensive creation standpoint. Obviously, I know everything that he does off the ball and as a screener for Curry to elevate his game, so I'm not by any means, disparaging the importance of Draymond Green, but they haven't really had those other go-to guys. Now, they have all of these young pieces that do make things really interesting. Brandon Pajemski had an excellent rookie season. Trace Jackson Davis as well with his rookie season ended up being a huge steal for them. You look at Jonathan Kuminga, who took significant steps forward this past year. And you can talk yourself into, they have options, but they don't really have a co-star for Curry to run with throughout a deep playoff run at this current moment. And that is where you start to look towards what a second star could be for them. And in the past, we've talked about Lauri Markkanen. They were heavily linked to him at one point. Brandon Ingram was at least kicked around in the Warriors camp, it sounds like, but they weren't ever really willing to commit to that. Jimmy Butler becomes a very interesting proposition for them, where Butler is somebody that ultimately, you're matching up him and Draymond, where it's not like you're the elite three-point shooting team that you once were, but Butler, I do think, it would far and away be the best teammate that he's ever played with, would give him some more opportunities to sort of relax his body a little bit more, and I think give you a little bit more, especially on the defensive side of the ball as well, where in Miami, I mean, during that 2023 playoff run, he took his defense up to that next level when he needed to, but at the same time, he was doing everything offensively. I actually go back to 2022. When you're talking about Jimmy Butler in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics, that transition three that he ends up pulling up for was more out of desperation for him because he was just so gassed that he knew he didn't really have it in him for another overtime period. Yeah, it was an open shot, but it's not necessarily his shot, especially in that moment, considering, what the stakes were at there, that it would give him a lot more leeway to sort of, try and rejuvenate himself, because he turns 36 years old tomorrow on Saturday, September 14th. So he is going to be 36 years old. Like I mentioned, he has missed at least 15 games in each of the past 5 seasons that I would have some hesitations of paying him long term. And again, Pat Riley has sort of voiced his discontent for Jimmy Butler at times of not being available for them. And not just that, but also speaking out to the media a lot, speaking down on Eastern Conference rivals, that he seems like the Heat front office is maybe a little bit frustrated. I'm sure grateful to him. He's led them to 2 NBA finals since the start of 2020, but it's also a matter of, that's great. What have you done for me recently? That's just the way that sports run in general. And I'm sure there are people, I'm sure 100% Jimmy Butler believes that if he was available for that Celtics series, they would have won. I would definitely push back on that idea. But again, talking hypotheticals doesn't really do anything for us. And it sounds like, according to Shams Charania, that Jimmy Butler plans to play out this season on the final year of his deal, does have a player option that he could pick up in 2025 if he wanted to, but it sounds like that is not going to be the plan, and he is hoping to hit free agency one more time and cash out one last time. So ultimately, it sounds like there's very little commitment between Jimmy Butler and the Heat on wanting to work out a long-term deal. And to me, the way that this plays out is that the Heat are going to evaluate what they have in-house through the first few months of the season. They get Jimmy Butler back. They get Terry Rozier back, Tyler Hero. And, Tyler Hero, brutal playoffs for him. But that being said, I think the biggest concern with the Heat in these past couple years has been that they don't have enough offensive firepower, that they don't have enough guys that can go and get you a bucket. You bring in Terry Rozier, who can do that. Tyler Hero, again, sure, does he struggle defensively? Yeah, but the defense isn't really the issue for the Heat. You have Bam Adebayo, who also, by the way, is coming off of this very impressive Olympic run that ultimately the Heat feel like they probably have a puncher's chance of, making some noise. I don't have a ton of faith in them, but it wouldn't make sense for them, in my opinion at least, to sort of pull the trigger on anything short of an outstanding deal now, because things break, somebody on the Celtics or the Knicks get hurt. The Heat probably aren't that far down the pecking order of the Eastern Conference to have a chance at another finals run. But I don't think that the Heat are going to be willing to, settle for more mediocre regular season showings from them. That they are, again, going to play this out at least for the first couple months and see whether or not this is something that they believe that they can build on. Because I do think that they have a defensive backbone, but they're also not quite as elite as they were when they were the 1 seed in 2000, at the top of the Eastern Conference in 2020 and 2021. And I think they were also the 1 seed actually in 2022 as well. That, they maybe don't have quite the same personnel in terms of defensive players there, but Heat culture, I know it's cliche, but I do just sort of buy into it in terms of, this idea that the Heat are going to play good defense, that Eric Spoelstra is going to maximize the talent of each of the players that are on their roster. Jaime Jaquez Jr. definitely emerging into one of the top young players for that Heat core. So I think they have no plans to move off of Jimmy Butler, that they're going to try and have success this upcoming season. If we're getting towards the trade deadline and the Heat do not appear to be in it, that's where I could see them maybe getting crazy, because I don't think that Jimmy Butler plays more than one season left with the Heat. I think he plays out the rest of this year, and no matter what happens, I think he either walks in free agency and somebody else pays him, or that the Heat end up trading him this upcoming season, maybe a little bit less likely, but the Warriors are going to be involved there, and I think that having at least from a mental perspective, a couple assassins in Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler would be incredibly entertaining to watch. Do I think it would be the thing that pushes the Warriors over the edge for being finals contenders once again? I don't, but just it's a fun idea, that's for sure. But let me know what your thoughts are on that fit in the comment section but that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show, and we will be back on Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.